All right. So we're all quarantined in and staying in place, staying safe, not touching your faces, not touching other people's faces. I hope, unless they give you consent and they're clean. Um, so I've seen. I know. There's a lot of anxiety and tension and sort of not knowing what is going on. A lot of different information, misinformation, lack of information being spread around. And I know all that can be really scary and frightening and can cause a lot of anxiety. Um, but I wanna remind everybody tonight that um, in spite of all of that anxiety, or maybe because of it in some ways, I've seen humans being really beautiful and really wonderful. I've seen them come together in amazing ways and overcome this forced isolation that we're under right now. So I just want to play my part in sharing a little bit of joy and sharing a little bit of comfort and a little bit of peace. So I'm going to share some stories written by David Eagleman. He is a neuroscientist who also has written some nonfiction, which is really, really accessible and really interesting, looking into how the mind works. And in that, he also has written some fiction because he became a neuroscientist because he's fascinated by this unknown of the mind, and he can't help but imagine what is happening in our minds. And so for his own entertainment and his own joy, he has fleshed out some of his imagination and shared it with the rest of us, thankfully. Um, so this is a collection of short stories that he wrote called Some. There are 40 of them. Each of them, on average, are about 3 to 5 minutes long. Some are only a minute long. I think the longest takes about 6 to 7 minutes to read. Um, I read a little slowly. We'll see how slowly I read. But yeah, you can come in and out of them as you please. Rewind, rewatch. I'll be setting up the audio and stuff so you can listen to it at your leisure, take it with you, fall asleep to it, whatever. Yeah, and I hope you enjoy. So the first one is called Some. Oh, also, I'm reading on my Kindle, which I hate. I really hate not having pages. So, just so you can have the sound of pages, here's a giant copy of everything Shakespeare ever wrote. We're gonna use that for the page sound effects. Oh, that's good. All right, Some. In the afterlife, you relive all of your experiences, but this time with the events reshuffled into a new order. All the moments that share a quality are grouped together. You spend 2 months driving the street in front of your house, 7 months having sex. You sleep for 30 years without opening your eyes. For 5 months straight, you flip through magazines while sitting on a toilet. You take all your pain at once, all 27 intense hours of it. Bones break, cars crash, skin is cut, babies are born. Once you make it through, it's agony free for the rest of your afterlife. But that doesn't mean it's always pleasant. You spend 6 days clipping your nails, 15 months looking for lost items, 18 months waiting in line, 2 years of boredom, staring out a bus window, sitting in an airport terminal, 1 year reading books. Your eyes hurt and you itch because you can't take a shower until it's your time to take your marathon 200-day shower. 2 weeks wondering what happens when you die. 1 minute realizing your body is falling. 77 hours of confusion. 1 hour realizing you've forgotten someone's name. 3 weeks realizing you were wrong. 2 days lying. 6 weeks waiting for a green light. 7 hours vomiting. 14 minutes experiencing pure joy. 3 months doing laundry. 15 hours writing your signature. 2 days tying shoelaces. 67 days of heartbreak. 5 weeks driving lost. 3 days calculating restaurant tips. 51 days deciding what to wear. 9 days pretending you know what is being talked about. 2 weeks counting money. 18 days staring into the refrigerator. 34 days longing, 6 months watching commercials, 4 weeks sitting in thought, wondering if there is something better you could be doing with your time. 3 years swallowing food, 5 days working buttons and zippers, 4 minutes wondering what your life would be like if you reshuffled the order of events. In this part of the afterlife, you imagine something analogous to your earthly life, and the thought is blissful. A life where episodes are split into tiny, swallowable pieces, where moments do not endure, where one experiences the joy of jumping from one event to the next like a child hopping from spot to spot on the burning sand. The next one is called Egalitaire. That's Manhattan, by the way. Thank you, Anthony. In the afterlife, you discover that God understands the complexities of life. She had originally submitted to peer pressure when she structured her universe, like all the other gods had, with a binary categorization of people into good and evil. But it didn't take long for her to realize that humans could be good in many ways, and simultaneously corrupt and mean spirited in other ways. How was she to arbitrate who goes to heaven and who to hell? Might not it be possible, she considered, that a man could be an embezzler and still give to charitable causes? Might not a woman be an adulteress, but bring pleasure and security to two men's lives? Might not a child unwittingly divulge secrets that splinter a family? Dividing the population into two categories, good and bad, seemed like a more reasonable task when she was younger. But with experience, these decisions became more difficult. She composed complex formulas to weigh hundreds of factors, and ran computer programs that rolled out long strips of paper with eternal decisions. But her sensitivities revolted at this automation, and when the computer generated a decision she disagreed with, she took the opportunity to kick out the plug in rage. That afternoon, she listened to the grievances of the dead from two warring nations. Both sides had suffered. Both sides had legitimate grievances. Both pled their cases earnestly. She covered her ears and moaned in misery. She knew her humans were multidimensional, and she could no longer live under the rigid architecture of her youthful choices. Not all gods suffer over this. We can consider ourselves lucky that in death we answer to a god with deep sensitivity to the Byzantine hearts of her creations. For months she moped around her living room in heaven, head drooped like a bulrush, while the lines piled up. Her advisors advised her to delegate the decision-making, but she loved her humans too much to leave them to the care of anyone else. In a moment of desperation, the thought crossed her mind to let everyone wait online indefinitely, letting them work it out on their own. But then a better idea struck her generous spirit. She could afford it. She would grant everyone, every last human, a place in heaven. After all, everyone had something good inside. It was part of the design specifications. Her new plan brought back the bounce to her gait, returned the color to her cheeks. She shut down the operations in hell, fired the devil, and brought every last human to be by her side in heaven. Newcomers or old-timers, nefarious or righteous, under the new system, everyone gets equal time to speak with her. Most people find her a little garrulous and over-solicitous, but she cannot be accused of not caring. The most important aspect of her new system is that everyone is treated equally. There is no longer fire for some and harp music for others. The afterlife is no longer defined by cots versus waterbeds, raw potatoes versus sushi, hot water versus champagne. Everyone is a brother to all, and for the first time an idea has been realized that never came to fruition on Earth: true equality. The communists are baffled and irritated because they have finally achieved their perfect society, but only by the help of a God in whom they don't want to believe. The meritocrats are abashed that they're struck for eternity in an incentiveless system with a bunch of pinkos. The conservatives have no penniless to disparage. The liberals have no downtrodden to promote. So God sits on the edge of her bed and weeps at night, because the only thing everyone can agree upon is that they're all in hell. Maybe equal isn't what we want. Maybe we need a little conflict to have a proper story arc. As we all tune into our dramas on Netflix. Maybe perfection is hell. Maybe we should remember that when things are less than perfect. All right, circle of friends. When you die, you feel as though you were some subtle change, but everything looks approximately the same. You get up and brush your teeth. You kiss your spouse and kids and leave for the office. There is less traffic than normal. The rest of your building seems less full, as though it's a holiday. But everyone in your office is here, and they greet you kindly. You feel strangely popular. Everyone you run into is someone you know. At some point, it dawns on you that this is the afterlife. The world is only made up of people you've met before. It's a small fraction of the world population, about 0.00002%, but it seems like plenty to you. It turns out that only the people you remember are here. So the woman with whom you shared a glance in the elevator may or may not be included. Your second grade teacher is here with most of the class. Your parents, your cousins, and your spectrum of friends through the years. All your old lovers, your boss, your grandmothers, and the waitress who served your food each day at lunch. Those you dated, those you almost dated, those you longed for. It is a blissful opportunity to spend quality time with your thousand connections, to renew fading ties, to catch up with those you let slip away. It is only after several weeks of this that you begin to feel forlorn. You wonder what's different as you saunter through the vast, quiet parks with a friend or two. No strangers grace the empty park benches. No family unknown to you throws breadcrumbs for the ducks and makes you smile because of their laughter. As you step into the street, you note there are no crowds, no buildings teeming with workers, no distant cities bustling, no hospitals running 24/7 with patients dying and staff rushing, no trains howling into the night with sardine passengers on their way home. Very few foreigners. You begin to consider all the things unfamiliar to you. You've never known, you realize, how to vulcanize rubber to make a tire. And now those factories stand empty. You've never known how to fashion a silicone chip from beach sand, how to launch rockets out of the atmosphere, how to pit olives or lay railroad tracks. And now those industries are shut down. The missing crowds make you lonely. You begin to complain about all the people you could be meeting. But no one listens or sympathizes with you because this is precisely what you chose when you were alive. Hmm. My, that one couldn't be more appropriate right now, could it? Um, Circle of friends, indeed. Well, this isolation certainly is making us choose more deeply, more precisely, more thoughtfully who our circle of friends are. Those people that we really have missed, those people that have been so close that we let them be far away, that we don't contact them as often as we should, maybe as often as we want to. Um, yeah, and wow, look, here we are. Here we are going through extra effort to connect, to be close to people. Um, all right, I'm going to disconnect for just 1 second, refill my Manhattan. Um, Everybody else can do the same if there's anybody. And I'm going to turn up the lights a little bit. I'll be right back. Yay! People are here. I figured out how to see the chat. Yay! People are here. All right. All right, now that I can actually see the chat window, this is nice. Cool. And Kathy, I'm going to put 3 ice cubes in. I feel like that's the right amount, especially for right now. And then we'll do one or two more stories. We'll see how they go. All right, it sounds like you guys are liking the stories as much as I've been liking them. So, yeah, when I first read these, I was going through quite a hard time, and was going through a lot of health issues, which some of you know about, some of you don't know about. I'll share more openly about that later. But anyway, I was having a hard time, and through the hard time, I ended up reading a lot and stumbled across Mr. Eagleman here, and he really blew my mind, and he really hit my heart like over and over again. It was kind of amazing. So I'm really grateful to be able to share this with everybody. And reading is, reading's usually such like a personal and private thing. It's, every once in a while you'll be able to convince somebody else to read a book with you, maybe, or maybe after you've read one or something like that, you can kind of vaguely talk about it. So this is a fun opportunity to get to share reading in a little more real time, a little more directly. All right, Manhattan's almost ready. Next story's almost ready. If I recall correctly, my Aunt Denny, all the way into the last days, when she was walking around using a walker, which wasn't for very long, she had 2 cup holders so that she could have 2 Manhattans. So this is my second Manhattan. I think after a second Manhattan, everybody has to go to bed. All right. Not bad. All right. This one is called The Descent of Species. In the afterlife, you are treated to a generous opportunity. You can choose whatever you would like to be in the next life. Would you like to be a member of the opposite sex, born into royalty, a philosopher with bottomless profundity, a soldier facing triumphant battles? But perhaps you've just returned here from a hard life, Perhaps you were tortured by the enormity of the decisions and responsibilities that surrounded you. And now there's only one thing you yearn for: simplicity. That's permissible. So for the next round, you choose to be a horse. You covet the bliss of that simple life, afternoons of grazing in grassy fields, the handsome angles of your skeleton and the prominence of your muscles, the peace of the slow flicking tail, or the steam rifling through your nostrils as you lope across snow-blanketed plains. You announce your decision. Incantations are muttered, a wand is waved, and your body begins to metamorphose into a horse. Your muscles start to bulge. A mat of strong hair erupts to cover you like a comfortable blanket in winter. The thickening and lengthening of your neck immediately feels normal as it comes about. Your carotid arteries grow in diameter. Your fingers blend hoofward. Your knees stiffen. Your hips strengthen. And meanwhile, your skull lengthens into its new shape. Your brain races in its changes. Your cortex retreats as your cerebellum grows. The homunculus melts man to horse. Neurons redirect. Synapses unplug and replug on their way to equestrian patterns, and your dream of understanding what it is like to be a horse gallops toward you from the distance. Your concern about human affairs begins to slip away. Your cynicism about human behavior melts, and even your human way of thinking begins to drift away from you. Suddenly, for just a moment, you're aware of the problem you overlooked. The more you become a horse, the more you forget the original wish. You forget what it was like to be a human, wondering what it was like to be a horse. This moment of lucidity does not last long, but it serves as a punishment for your sins, a Promethean, entrails-pecking moment, crouching half horse, half man, with the knowledge that you cannot appreciate the destination without knowing the starting point. You cannot revel in the simplicity unless you remember the alternatives. And that's not the worst of your revelation. You realize that the next time you return here with your thick horse brain, you won't have the capacity to ask to become a human again. You won't understand what a human is. Your choice to slide down the intelligence ladder is irreversible. And just before you lose your final human faculties, you painfully ponder what magnificent extraterrestrial creature enthralled with the idea of finding a simpler life chose in the last round to become a human. All right. Well, glad I didn't become a horse. And I'm grateful to be a human. All right, this next one is called Giantess. The afterlife is all about softness. You find yourself in a great padded compound. Everything appears designed for quietness and comfort. Your feet fall silently on the cushioned floor. The walls are pillowed. Echoes are dampened by foam ceiling tiles. A hard surface is impossible to find. Feathers pad everything. When you enter the grand hall, the first thing you notice is a sizable and princely man. He looks just as you might expect a god to appear, except that he is noticeably skittish and strained with worry around the eyes. He will probably be explaining that he is greatly disturbed by the nuclear arms proliferation on Earth. He says that he often awakes in a cold sweat with the sounds of colossal blasts hammering in his ears. To be clear, he says to you, I am not your god. Instead, you and I are galactic neighbors. I am from a planet associated with the star you call Terzon 4. So we are all in the same mess. What mess, you ask? Please don't talk so loudly, he softly admonishes. For a long time, we have been studying our neighbors, you Earthlings, and 37 other planets besides. We have developed highly accurate systems of equations to predict the future growth and social directions of your planets. Here, he fixes in your eyes. It turns out that you Earthlings are among the least tranquil and content. Our predictions indicate that your weapons of war will grow increasingly loud. Your space exploration programs will produce thousands of noisy vessels that will thunder throughout the heavens with their deafening rocket propulsion. You Earthlings are like your explorer Cortez, standing atop a mountain peak and preparing to perturb every beach at all the lapping fringes of the Pacific. We're in a mess of expansionism, you manage? That's not the mess, he hisses. Allow me to illustrate the larger picture. You and I, our planets, our galaxy, we're part of what you should think of as an immeasurable living mass. You might call it a giantess. But summarizing the concept in a word might give you the illusion that you can have a hint of a notion of her enormity. To give you a sense of scale, you are the size of an atom for her. Your Earth, sprouting with its untold layers of furiously fecund species, your Earth is tantamount to a single protein in the shadowy depths of a single one of her cells. Our Milky Way constitutes a single cell, but a small one. She consists of hundreds of billions of such cells. For millions of years, my people had no notion of her. Just a flatworm is unlikely, just as a flatworm is unlikely to discover that the planet is round. A colony of bacteria will never know the walls of a flask. A single cell in your hand will not know it is contributing to a concerto on the piano. But with advancing philosophy and technology, we came to appreciate our situation. Then, a few millennia ago, it was theorized that we might be able to communicate with her. It was proposed that we might decipher her structure, deploy signals, influence her behavior in the manner that infinitesimal molecules, hormones, alcohols, narcotics, influence a creature like you. So we organized and educated ourselves. Instead of fretting through the doomed, ignoble cycles of local politics, we dedicated our economy and sciences toward understanding the biochemistry of universal scales. We methodically mapped out the signaling cascades and stellar anatomy of her nervous system, and at last discovered how to transmit a signal to her consciousness. We sent a sharply defined sequence of electromagnetic pulses, which interacted with local magnetospheres, which influenced asteroid orbits, which nudged planets closer and farther from stars, which dictated the fate of life forms, which changed the gases in the atmosphere, which bent the path of light signals, all in complex interacting cascades we had worked out. Our calculations told us that it took a few hundred years for the transmission to arrive at her consciousness. At the time of arrival, I was sad to be traveling away from the planet while everyone was so excited to see what would happen. His face twitches with painful trickles of reminiscence. But no one would have guessed what happened next. A great sheet of meteors rained down, incendiary hydrogen clouds crushed in, and these were followed by a multitude of black holes that mercilessly swallowed up the flying chunks and dust and the last light of remembrance. No one survived. In all probability, this was neutral to her. It might have been an immune system response, or she might have been scratching an itch, or sneezing, or getting a biopsy. So we discovered that we can communicate with her, but we cannot communicate meaningfully. We are of insufficient size. What can we say to her? What question could we ask? How could she communicate and answer back to us? Perhaps that was her attempt to answer. What could you ask her to do that would have relevance to your life? And if she told you what was of importance to her, could you understand her answer? Do you think it would have any meaning at all if you displayed one of your Shakespearean plays to a bacterium? Of course not. Meaning varies with spatial scale. So we have concluded that communicating with her is not impossible, but it is pointless. And that is why we are now hunkered down silently on the surface of this noiseless planet, whispering through a slow orbit, trying not to draw attention to ourselves. Damn. Yeah, as Easy said, oh shit. Um, Here we all are trying to draw attention to ourselves. Um, a lot of times we need to remember to be quiet. We need to remember to listen. Um, we need to remember to hear what somebody else is going through. I stayed off of Facebook for a while I was going through my hard time, um, mostly just because I couldn't do anything. Um, but when I came back, I saw Facebook in ways that, like, when you've gone away for a long time and you come back and the whole room smells different. You know, they're familiar smells, but you recognize them more intensely. And and I saw friends fighting with each other in nasty, vitriolic ways, and just going at each other's throats in ways that, if they were in public, we would have been separating them and probably kicking them both out of the club and telling them to go home and sober up. And you know, here laying out all of our differences and our defenses and our righteousness, um, our individual opinions. I think we need to remember to listen to each other. I think we need to remember how insignificant we are, how small we are. Um, I think only by being small do we have an opportunity to become bigger. All right, I'm gonna do another one. Um, I've still got more Manhattan. I'm doing all right. Let me know how you guys are doing. Sounds like you're enjoying them. All right, this one's called Mary. When you arrive in the afterlife, you find that Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley sits on a throne. She is cared for and protected by a covey of angels. After some questioning, you discover that God's favorite book is Shelley's Frankenstein. He sits up at night with a worn copy of the book clutched in his mighty hands, alternately reading the book and staring reflectively into the night sky. Like Victor Frankenstein, God considers himself a medical doctor, a biologist without parallel, and he has a deep, painful relationship with any story about the creation of life. He has much to say about bringing animation to the unanimated. Very few of his creatures had thought deeply about the challenge of creation, and it relieved him a little of the loneliness of his position when Mary wrote her book. The first time he read Frankenstein, he criticized it the whole way through for its oversimplification of the process involved. But when he reached the end, he was won over. For the first time, someone understood him. That's when he called out for her and put her on a throne. To understand his outpouring of feeling, you must understand the trajectory of God's medical career. God discovered the principles of self-organization by experimenting with yeast and bacteria. He reveled in beauty of his inventions. Once he mastered the general principles, his inventions became increasingly sophisticated. With artistic flair, he sewed together the astounding platypus, the compact beetle, the weighty woolly mammoth, the glistening pods of dolphins. His skills became razor sharp and keen, his accurate fingers fashioned, with blinding ambitious accuracy, all the animals at the limits of his vast imagination. But then, unwittingly, he crossed his Rubicon. He created man, his most prized possession, his treasure, pride, show speeds, and obsession. Unlike the other animals who experienced each day like the one before, man cared, sought, yearned, erred, coveted, and ached, just like God himself. He marveled as man picked through the ground and formed tools. The invention of musical instruments reached God's ears like a symphony. He watched with awe as men gathered up, erected cities, built walls. He felt his joy turn to trepidation as they began to scrap and brawl. It didn't take long before they were invading, wars waged, and he tried to talk sense to those who might listen. He quickly discovered he had less control than he thought. There were simply too many of them. He tried to make good things come to good people and bad to bad, but he didn't have the technology to implement it, The bloodshed mounted and was carried forward by the Assyrians and Babylonians. The Greco-Macedonians assailed their neighbors. The Romans began their onslaught until the sieges of barbarians and Goths. Byzantium rose and fell in blood. The Chinese baited and pounced. Europeans flung themselves at each other. The bright colors of his ground were darkening with man's blood, and there was precious little he could do to stop it. And throughout, the voices of man reached him with pleas for help, entreaties for aid against one another. He plugged his ears and howled against the cries of pillaged villagers, the prayers of extinguishing soldiers, the supplications from Auschwitz. This is why he now locks himself in his room and at night sneaks out onto the roof with Frankenstein, reading again and again how Dr. Victor Frankenstein is taunted by his merciless monster across the Arctic ice. And God consoles himself with the thought that all creation necessarily ends in this: creators, powerless, fleeing from the things they have wrought. I don't know about you all, but I need a drink after that one. Quite a bit. All right. I'm not even going to think about the creations that I've wrought, things that have gone awry, carried on and seemingly their own wills. But if you haven't read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you definitely should. All right. I think we're going to do one more for the night. This is the cast. Something dawned on you when you heard the children's song, "Merrily, merrily, 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 life is but a dream." You began to suspect that you were perhaps a butterfly dreaming it was a human, or worse yet, a brain in a jar experiencing sights and sounds and smells and tastes, all of them but dream stuff. And so you waited for death in order to wake up, in order to find out what you were strapped with spotted wings or surrounded by a glass jar. But it turns out you missed the mark. It's not life that is a dream. It is death that is a dream. Stranger still, it is not your dream. It is someone else's. You now recall that your dreams always had background characters. The crowds in the restaurant, the knots of people in the malls and schoolyards, the other drivers on the road, and the jaywalking pedestrians. Those actors don't come from nowhere. We stand in the background playing our parts, allowing the experience to feel real for the dreamer. Sometimes we listen and pay attention to the plot of the dream. More often, we talk among ourselves and wait for our shift to end. This is not a job choice, but indenture. You owe the same number of hours of service as you spent dreaming during your lifetime. No one is very pleased about this work except for some former thespians. Mostly we give them the interactive roles every night. We're happy to sit in the background. If we're lucky enough that the dreamer casts us in a restaurant, we get a free meal out of it. Or less fortunate nights, we're cast as masqueraders at a terrifying party, or as sufferers in deep circles of hell, or as co-workers who have to point and laugh when the star walks in without clothes. For those in the interactive roles, lines of dialogue are flashed on a screen behind the dreamer to be delivered as convincingly as possible. Most of us give poor performances. We're not trained actors and have little incentive. Fortunately, the dreamers seem to believe whatever we deliver, even if we don't look like the characters in question. The dreamers are convinced that we are who they think we are, and are only mildly confused even when we cast different genders in the roles. Once, a long time ago, The Dreamcast went on strike, and for 3 days, everyone on Earth dreamt of wandering empty homes and threading through deserted streets. Interpreting this as a grim omen, several people jumped to their deaths. When they showed up as new inductees in the Dreamcast, their piteous stories brought forth tears of sympathy from the others, who abandoned the strike immediately. Perhaps it doesn't seem to you as if the afterlife is much of a punishment, but I haven't told you the worst part. In the mornings, when we're done with our nighttime haunts in other people's skulls, we fall into restless slumbers of our own. And who do you think populates our dreams? Those who have finished their time here and passed from this world. We forever live in the dreams of the next generation. The man to your left hypothesizes that everything is cyclical and that we'll eventually be back on Earth. This appears to be a time-sharing plan devised by some efficient deity. In this way, we're not all populating the Earth at the same time. What's the problem with this? There is a woman in my dreams whom I see every night, but I can never catch up with her, passing as we do into our next worlds. So I think that's quite the fitting one to leave you all on. An afterlife that talks of dreams, one in which we are indentured servants in each other's dreams, forced to play actors, background characters, depending on our skill levels. Evan, I see you're out there still drinking. I hope that we would have more entertaining parts for our own sakes and others. But yeah, imagine if we're all stuck in this circle of dreams. So as you lay your head and dream tonight, don't dream of COVID or all the fears of catching some unknown, still relatively untestable for us disease. Instead,